Okay, hi. Welcome to another MIS 301 iVlog, and this is iVlog 2, and I'm going to be talking about chapters 3, 4, and 5, and my name is Talha Khan. So, first of all, chapter 3, which is a relational database model, we're going to be talking about primary key, which is uh, which is an identifier composed of one or maybe more attributes that basically it uniquely identifies each row. And then you have a foreign key, which is basically a primary key of one table, which is placed into another table, and it acts as a common attribute. And we use foreign key as a form of controlled redundancy. Next up, with relational databases, we have relationships within the relational databases. So the relationships we have are one-to-many, one-to-one, and many-to-many, as you can see, the way they're noted. And you have an example for one-to-many would be a painter and paintings. A painter can have many paintings, but those paintings can only belong to one painter, which is why you have one-to-many. You have a dean in college for one-to-one. A dean could be a college could only have one dean, and that dean could be the dean of only one college only. Students can have many classes, and many classes can have many students, so that's a many-to-many relationship. Uh, Moving on, you could see here you have the primary key, you have entity student, you have the primary key as student ID, and you have entity class here, you have the primary key as class ID, and student ID from the student entity table has been taken and put here, which acts as a foreign key in the entity class, and it basically has a common attribute among these relationship tables. Now, the diagram you see here is a Crowfoot's model, which takes me to chapter 4. So here in chapter 4 we have entity relationship modeling, and the notations that we've learned are Crowfoot's model, as you've just seen. There's the Chen model and the UML, which is Unified Modeling Language. Moving on, we'll talk about attributes. There are some type of attributes that you need to know for ER modeling, which are required attributes, and required attributes are basically attributes that must have a value. So they cannot be left empty or null. Um, then you have optional attributes, which are just the opposite, which they can have a value, but they can also be left empty. The next you have composite attribute, which is an attribute that can be further divided uh, or subdivided into to yield additional attributes. So a good example of this would be address. If they ask you for address, it could be divided further into street, city, zip code, and etc. Then you have your multi-valued attribute, which is an attribute that has that could have multiple values, as the name suggests, multi-valued. So a good example would be if, say, they're asking you for your degree or your level of education. Then, say if you've done a PhD, then you could mention your bachelor's, your master's, and your PhD. So level of education or education, you could say your bachelor's, master's, so you could take in different values. Um, then you have your derived attribute, which isn't something that physically exists within the entity. It is just something that's derived from the algorithm. And the best example would be your age. So say you put in you're asked to put in your year or your birthday, and then the system just derives your age. And lastly, domain. Domain is basically the possible set of values for any given attribute. So say you have to input your GPA, or the system will not accept anything that is below 0 or above 4, because GPA is determined between 0 and 4. And that would be end of chapter 4. Moving on to chapter 5, which is advanced data modeling. And we're going to talk about two very important things here, which is entity supertypes and entity subtypes. So in a specialization hierarchy, which is a top-down process, the topmost entities would be your supertypes, and the bottom one would be your subtypes. Um, and the supertypes are usually the generic ones that contain like common characteristics. And then once you get into subtypes, you'll get into more unique and specific characteristics of each entity. So in this example, as you can see, employee is the entity supertype, and you divide it further into secretary, engineer, and accountant, which are your entity subtypes. So with that, I conclude my iVlog 2. Thank you for watching, and yep.